Hiya. I read this great quote thing this morning. I was doing some emotion code, body code on myself because I've got such high levels of irritability at the moment. And so I was asking my body, what does my body, subconscious, soul most need me to release at this time? And I'm usually working just emotion code, like body codes is the much broader plate that emotion code comes off. And you do muscle testing, you track from this chart, and it went to organs and glands, and then there's a breakdown in there of like bones, muscles, connective tissue. Sorry, it's under structural, and then within structural is organs and glands. And so I was going through this list of all the organs and glands, and it came up with hypothalamus, an imbalance in the hypothalamus. So then I'm asking, well, what's imbalance in the hypothalamus? And I retrack again the chart, and it went to an energy, an emotion. And the trapped emotion was an inherited shock just from my dad. So whenever I usually get inherited emotions, they usually go back a few generations, but this one was just from my dad when my dad was 9, according to my body, my muscle testing. When my dad was 9, he experienced a shock that got trapped in his body, and then I inherited that at conception. I can't ask my dad because he's not around, he's not here anymore. So that's interesting. But yeah, it was inherited shock in the hypothalamus, imbalance in the hypothalamus. Now, I found this really interesting because I've looked at the hypothalamus quite a lot before. It's known as the master gland. When I was using the cranial stimulation device, the SOTA biotuner for depression and anxiety, when I was researching that, what I was learning is that those electrical currents stimulate the hypothalamus, and that the hypothalamus is known as the master gland, and it is to do with the entire endocrine system, which for mine is imbalanced because I'm insulin dependent diabetic, so that's the pancreas, which is part of the endocrine system. It has to do with all the hormones that you produce, and it regulates emotions, in particularly the emotions of pleasure and pain, fear and rage, apparently. Irritability, I'm sure, is in there. So I found it really interesting that it tracked to this imbalance in the hypothalamus this morning. So I found the imbalance and I've released it with a magnet over my governing meridian, and it'll take like 2 or 3 days of processing. And then my body was like, don't want to do anymore, don't want to release anymore. So I'm like, okay, so I'll just have to watch it. But then I went on a bit of a mission researching hypothalamus and like what's going on in the metaphysical realms with imbalances in the hypothalamus. And I found this really interesting article, which I'll link below this video, which was about, I can't remember the title of it, but it was about mental health and the hypothalamus and a lot of the other organs and systems that are being part of the imbalances that cause mental health issues. Just read it. But at the beginning of this article, it had this great quote, which I'm going to read now, by David Lovelace. I know that name, but I can't think where I know him from. I don't know him. I'm all a bit scattered. There's lots of different thoughts and things going off at the same time. Anyway. Compared to bipolar's magic, reality seems a raw deal. It's not just the boredom that makes recovery so difficult. It's the slow dawning pain that comes with sanity, the realization of illness, the humiliating scenes, the blown money and friendships and confidence. Depression seems almost inevitable. The pendulum swings back from transcendence in shards, a bloody dangerous mess. Crazy high is better than crazy low. So we gamble, dump the pills, and stick it to the control freaks and doctors. They don't understand, we say. They just don't get it. They'll never be artists. David Lovelace. Now, I like this for a lot of reasons when I read it, because I can resonate with it, and I can also see how far I've come in my bipolar journey, which has really been going on over the last decade, sort of really kicked off 10 years ago. Although I'm sure it was there before that. It's just that it really kicked off in a way that I was very conscious of back in 2007. And I'm just going to go through this quote to share what I resonate with. Yeah, compared to bipolar's magic, reality really does seem like a raw deal, because when you're, for me, when I first experienced mania, also known as psychosis, I'd been detoxing for like a year and a half. My body was really clean. I'd been eating really healthy food, no wheat, no meat, no dairy, no nicotine, no alcohol, no caffeine, no sugar, no carbohydrates. So a lot of like fresh vegetables and water and stuff, and yeah, and so stuff that had been really in lockdown in me started surfacing, and I just went into the magical realms. You kind of like move beyond the realm of normality and you go into these magical realms. And I remember saying, like, every single day for months, over and over and over again, oh my God, I feel like I'm in Lord of the Rings, I feel like I'm in Harry Potter, like literally, because the amount of synchronicity and magic I was experiencing was just way beyond the norm. And so I wasn't in touch with just normal reality until after I'd had a breakdown, and then the depression had come in. It's not just the boredom that makes recovery so difficult. I would not call it boredom, by the way. I wouldn't call it boredom. I'd call it terrifying frustration, something like that. It's not just the boredom that makes recovery so difficult. It's the slow dawning pain that comes with sanity, the realization of illness, the humiliating scenes, the blown money and friendships and confidence. Now, I can really relate to the realization of illness most out of all of those. The rest of it's just all part of it, but it's the realization of illness, like that. There's so many intense phases of that. Like, for me, I was absolutely convinced I was mad, and I remember someone saying to me, look, Lex, for as long as you think that you're mad, then you're not mad, because only mad people think that they're not mad. So if you think you're mad, it's because you're not mad. I got it at the time, and it actually really helped me. Although nowadays I really don't think I'm mad anymore, so I must be mad now. But I thought I was completely mad. And it was when I read an article that said, those suffering with mental illness suffer an unusual intensity of normal subjective thoughts and feelings. That was a turning point for me, of like, oh my God, I'm normal, and like I'm intensely normal, and I wore that for a bit, as trying to understand the bipolar 1 diagnosis. I'm intensely normal, and total human was another one. I'm sure I've talked about this on videos before, but hey, it's coming up again. But yeah, the realization of illness. And back then in 2009, it was like, you know, bipolar, the word bipolar for me felt magnified and massive and humongous and all-encompassing and huge, and like I was trying to take it on and embrace it and own it. And the whole process, which went on for years with that, was helping me to understand this diagnosis, what it's called from the medical perspective in the physical world, and seeing all these other human beings with this same label that had been pasted over them, and kind of seeing it through my own lens, which is I see things more through my spiritual awakening lens, if you like. So I've got my own sort of inner soul understanding of what bipolar is, and then I'm aware that out here in the world there's this whole other understanding of it. So I really owned the title bipolar for a while, but over the last decade, my ownership of it, or the big blown up neon bright light of the label of it, has kind of shrunk a bit and become less important, less dramatic to me. It's more now, it's just like, yeah, bipolar, you know, like I'm insulin dependent diabetic as well, and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's more, it doesn't faze me as much now, or maybe I don't have as much shock and shame around it now. And again, this is all from just having lived with it for the last 10 years. Back to this quote. Depression seems almost inevitable. Well, it does. Like if you swing that high in a mania or even a hypomania, and looking back 10 years ago, I remember, because I write journals and I can reflect on my journals and see where I've been. But 10 years ago, when I was in a mania, there was absolutely no recognition at all of depression. Like, it doesn't exist. Not anywhere, let alone in me, or blah, 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 blah. And then the pendulum would swing and you'd be in depression. And then when you're in depression, there's absolutely no recognition of happiness or excitement or mania. You know, it just doesn't. One total swing over to this polar side would make you blind to what was going on over this side, and then when you're over here you're blind to that side. So that was what it was like then. But over the years it's become, I've got more awareness of it now, and a lot more insight, and I can recognize it. It's kind of all sort of reintegrating and refusing back together into this wholesome mess that I am. So yeah, when you're in mania, that's not sustainable. So depression is kind of inevitable. The pendulum swings back from transcendence in shards and a bloody dangerous mess. Crazy high is better than crazy low. I only really believed that after I realised there was a high under low. I only really thought crazy high is better than crazy low for a couple of years, really, until I started identifying that crazy high wasn't like good at all. It's deeply agitated and irritable, and it's not pleasant, you know. And neither is the depression, which also for me has always been deeply agitated. Never like a flat out bored, numb depression. I've never had that. It's always been, it's called agitated depression. Really like frenetic, like a lot of internal movement going on in it, but you're just totally wiped out and can't do anything. So we gamble, dump the pill, stick it to the control freaks and doctors. Well, I refused medication for bipolar right from the very first moment I was diagnosed with it. I took superhuman powers to refuse and say no without freaking out and kicking off, because I knew that I'd get sectioned if I did that. I had to use the most superhuman power I've ever had to source within myself in that moment. It was a huge moment for me to say no and be able to get out of the hospital. And the big driving reason for me behind knowing that it wasn't correct for me to take psychotropic meds was purely because I'm insulin dependent diabetic, and I'm insulin dependent. I have injections, 4 or 5 injections every single day of my life, and I was like, I am not having anything else to become dependent upon. I don't care what it is, I'm not doing it. That was really the reasoning. And it took a lot of strength. And through the peaks and troughs of bipolar, I've often really seriously wondered how the hell I've got through it, simultaneously at the same time understanding that if I'd have been taking psychotropic meds, I probably would have been chucked around on a whole other roller coaster as well. So how have I got through it? Well, I do a lot of work on myself and a lot of self-healing, a lot of energy medicine techniques. I can't get away with not doing that. I can't get away with not being self-aware. I can't get away with just fucking doing anything I want to do. I have to be aware the whole time and pay deep attention to and feel everything that's going on to be able to work with myself consistently, daily, forever and ever and ever. And that's it, really. A lot of work, a lot of rest, a lot of feeling and experiencing everything. So that was kind of, Christ, I've been talking for 17 minutes. Anyway, yeah, so whatever I've just been talking about was why I was here talking about it. It's a little bit of a bipolar mental health discussion. So that all came from me finding an imbalance in my hypothalamus and clearing it this morning with emotion code, body code. Emotion code is something you can learn to do yourself, and it's really powerful and effective, and I'd recommend it. Sun's coming out.